Welcome to Standing on the Shoulders of Hobbits. My name is Harry Pedigo,
Father Frank Amberger.
and today we're looking at one of our favorite chapters,
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5 of The Hobbit.
Pivotal chapter, I think, in meeting a certain character, which will be, well, actually, interesting enough for the rest of The Hobbit, we won't see him, I don't think at all, but will be pivotal when it comes to Lord of the Rings. So pivotal for that reason, but pivotal, I think, because this is a very important, point of transformation. This is, it's going to be through some hardships, but so we get into the story. Bilbo is awaking, he's regaining consciousness because unbeknownst to him, I don't know if he ever really, I think maybe I don't know, at some point that he figures out he has basically hit his head as they're fleeing the goblins, and I don't know, one of the dwarves is carrying him, and inadvertently, in the darkness, Bilbo hits his head on the low aspect of the tunnel, gets knocked unconscious, rolls off to the side, is just sort of left behind, which is a good thing in some respects. At least the goblins didn't get him, but then he wakes up and he realizes he is alone. There's nobody there. I can't even imagine. I mean, it'd be, I know we had talked before about, I don't know, at some point about being in a cave.
Yeah, terrible prospect.
And having no light. I mean, literally, the hand in front of your face, you couldn't even see it. So he has no idea, what direction, he's utterly lost. So I mean, you have to say, wow, the guy is, there's no goblins around, but he's in a terrible situation. He kind of crawls around, I think, a little bit, and he sits down. He's beyond miserable. He is just really kind of sort of lost himself. Now, in the midst of all this, what appears to be just inadvertently, as he's kind of crawling around, I guess, on all fours, trying to figure out which end is up, he puts his hand on this little cold piece of metal, and it's a ring, okay, and it says, almost without thinking, he just puts it in his pocket.
Absent-mindedly.
Okay, absolutely, just like, wow.
Whatever,
it doesn't seem like, it's not like, it's a ring.
This is going to help me, right?
Just put it in, and it says it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. So this is a turning point, and Tolkien says this is a turning point in his career, but he did not know it at that point. So it is interesting just to note that there can be substantial things that happen in our lives that at the time we are completely oblivious, or we only maybe see part of the grace of that moment, and we might think, well, whatever. So it definitely, there's the aspect of being aware and being even more aware, that self-awareness of trying to see how God is working. Now, at this point, there's no reason. That's not a criticism to Bilbo. I mean, why would he think this ring would have any, it's not like it's a flashlight that he's like, okay, now I can see. But I think for our own lives, it is good for us to spend time, especially in today's culture that is, I think, very unself-reflective.
Oh, yes.
Good, spend time in reflection. We'll come back to that again as we move forward in the text here. But so he finds the ring, but that doesn't really moving forward. He basically gets to a point very soon after this. Says, now certainly Bilbo was in what is called a tight place, and says he gave himself up to complete, and I can never say this word, miserableness, I guess, more or less. He felt very crushed. He's
devastated, isn't he?
Devastated. I mean, what are you going to do? You're in utter darkness, etc., etc. He's feeling around for, I've got my pipe. I've got tobacco. He's feeling around for matches. So the fact that he's got his pipe, it's not broken, he's got tobacco, that actually lifts him up a little bit, lifts his spirit up, and he can't find any matches, and that just completely crushes him. So it's just like, he's very fragile at this point, if you will. I mean, little things might go like, okay, what now? And then, he goes back to like, well, I guess that was a good thing that I didn't,
The
because
goblins would have, yeah.
what would that have brought out of the tunnels? So, yeah.
Is the pipe kind of, would you say, whether it be just conjecture, do you think the pipe is sort of a vestige of comfort? Because we talked about that.
Oh, I
chapter
think
one and two.
you're absolutely right. I think there is. I think there's a sense, because we know that Bilbo is definitely sort of bound by his comforts. So I think there is an aspect of that. But I think there's also just a sense of creaturely comforts. I always say, sometimes people, I don't know, and I'm not going to go on a rant about today's culture, but sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, you can't eat that or eat that, you're gonna die. I'm like, well, we're all gonna die anyway. So, if something gives us a little bit of a comfort, and eating that donut, by golly, eat the donut. If it makes you, gives you a little sense of happiness, if that's the reason you're living is to eat donuts, no, that's something's wrong there. But a little creature comfort, I think, can be a good thing.
I can see that.
It's just a little extra, boost. But then again,
Can I interject one
Sure,
more time?
absolutely.
This is something completely that we had not rehearsed or gone over or anything like that, which is actually a
I
lot.
was gonna say that's most of
That's
it.
most of it, yeah. But when you were talking about the discovery of the ring, I wonder, do you think, because we know that Tolkien at some point went back and revised chapter 5
Yes.
to establish the significance of the ring.
Right.
Are there some elements in which, or that part where he says, this changed his career forever? It sounds a bit autobiographical, but that's complete just.
Well, that is a very, because really you could say that Tolkien's genius in bringing, I don't know the history of his what is sometimes referred to as his legendarium.
Sure.
How he's creating this, but he does say in Lord of the Rings, in the first part, in chapter 2, which is when Gandalf is really explaining sort of the whole, if you will, the provenance or the history of the ring.
Yes.
Tolkien does say in the preface that he has written that chapter 2 in Lord of the Rings is, I think he says, one of the most important and the oldest part of the story. Something to that effect. I don't remember the exact words, but indicates that, I don't know, what was the seed planted in Tolkien's mind and heart that really then germinates over time, over decades, over I don't know how many years he was working on, over 40, 50 years, I think.
Sure.
At what point, what was one of the first thoughts? One of the first,
catalyst.
yeah, I don't know. I'm not
Anyway,
sure.
I'm sorry.
No, but it's an interesting point, and it wouldn't surprise me if that is part of what, I know that some of the parts of that were rewritten or tweaked in chapter 5, but you wonder, some of the small details. Was that one of the small details?
I wonder, because I don't think if you were writing it the first time, the first draft of that, you didn't understand the significance of the ring, you wouldn't say this changed his career forever.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
Anyway,
not sure.
he's
Somewhat
tobacco
speculative.
pipe that's really
Yep. So, but he's crushed again. But then he's like, well, I guess that was a good thing. But I mean, it's the whole thing. It's like a roller coaster. It's just up and down. Like I said, at this point, understandably so, he's pretty fragile. Little things can raise him up. Little things can just crush him because he's just in a bad spot. But one of the things that up to this point has been largely overlooked, even by Bilbo himself, as he's patting his pockets trying to find his matches, his hand falls upon his little sword.
That's right.
And it's probably, gosh, I would say it's probably not much bigger than, if you've ever seen sort of in our early frontier history in the United States, I don't know if they were the long hunters, I don't know, but they had these long knives. They were probably, I don't know, maybe a foot, the blade was a foot in length.
Knife? Is it kind of?
It was before that. It was like, oh gosh, what are some of the, Daniel Boone, David Crockett,
Sure.
Some of the, gosh, I can't think of some of the names, but
Simon Kenton.
Simon Kenton, yeah, exactly, that was the name that I was kind of thinking of, that they were called long knives, and I think there's somebody, a YouTube channel that I'll kind of keep track of, sort of an outdoor guy down in Kentucky, who actually has come up with his own pattern. I think it's called.
Oh, no kidding.
I think the Shawnee, he calls it the Shawnee name, which I know people are at this point like, why am I listening to these guys? They're talking about these long knives, but they called the Chamonix. They were called, either that was the long knife or they were the ones that were carrying the long knives. I don't remember exactly, but I'm thinking it's not a sword as we would consider it. It's just a short. I don't even think it was be the Roman.
It'd be shorter than that. I agree.
Shorter than the Roman.
Now Bilbo realizes that he in fact has an elvish shaman.
Yes, so now he pulls it out, and that's what really changes so much, because the blade, just as the two other elvish blades that in Rivendell, as Elrond is kind of saying, oh well, these are really, they've got a lot of sort of history, provenance behind them.
Yes.
They've got names, they've got runes on them. You know, they're jeweled hilts. I mean, and they are elvish blades made for the Goblin Wars. And so when they are around, or when goblins are within a certain proximity, they actually have like almost a bluish, what would you call it, light that emanates, from these. Up to this point, I think Bilbo, when they found these swords in the trolls' hoard, Thorin and Gandalf, they don't like, oh, hey, look at that little, Bilbo just finds it and just thinks, it's just sort of this knife that would have been sort of a pocket knife, almost sized for trolls. It's in I think it's sort of a battered scabbard. It doesn't have any runes on it. There's nothing, it's just
remarkable, right?
Nothing remarkable. But when he pulls it out, and so it's been overlooked. Actually, it was overlooked by the goblins, because the goblins took
all their weapons.
Thorin's.
You're right.
Now, Gandalf is able to get that one back when they escape from the chapter before. But it was overlooked by the goblins because Bilbo wore it I think in his breeches or something like that. So he even forgot about it at this point. So he pulls it out and he's like, oh, wow, look at this. That the edges were glowing. It was just a little bit of blue light. And so it's a plus and a minus, because you think, oh, it's a big plus because it's an elvish blade.
Right.
And he thought, isn't that wonderful to have something that was made for the Goblin Wars? And he feels there's a surge of hope and purpose, and I'll come back to that in a moment. There's also the same point, like, oh, well, there are goblins. They're not real close, but they're not far enough,
there.
so they're still there. But it says in this point, he really, this is the point where I think it really turns for him. Now, there's a physical reason. Yes, he's got a weapon. Not sort of the most, like, for a goblin, but it also gives him a little bit of light.
Yes,
that he's able to sort of negotiate through. But it's interesting because in the last chapter, when Gandalf says, he rescues them, but they got just, the ton of goblins are after them. It's like, okay, well, it could be worse. It could be a lot better. We don't have any food. We don't have any horses, ponies. We got a horde of angry goblins after us. But he doesn't just say, well, gosh, what are we going to do now? His point is, on we go. And so I think Tolkien is pulling this forward. And so you've got, Bilbo at this point just really beside himself. But it says, but somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars. His whole attitude changes. So he says, go back. He thought, no good at all. Go sideways, impossible. Go forward, only thing to do, on we go. So it really gives him that push forward, that nudge, sort of, okay, now he's going, and he starts kind of exploring. He's like, well, okay, I think I'm going to go in this direction. It seems, reasonable. So this is a side point, although, I don't know, it's a side point in the text, but I think it can be kind of important. Sometimes I think Tolkien's Middle-earth would be criticized by some by saying it's just sort of too fantastic. These creatures don't exist, and it's just shows how kind of maybe unrealistic Middle-earth really is. Well, yes, but so as Tolkien is sort of the narrator at this point, is kind of describing the goblins' tunnels, where Bilbo is all going. He says, even the tunnels and caves the goblins have made for themselves, there are other things that are living unbeknownst to them, that have, as he says, sneaked in from the outside to sort of live in the dark. Well, we'll meet one of these very, very shortly here. But he says some of these creatures are ages before the goblins. So even though the goblins had made the tunnels and kind of connected them, but there are some of these caves that they predate the goblins even. And there, as he says, the original owners are still there in odd quarters, slinking and nosing about. Now, I think we see, now this is Lord of the Rings, but we see one of those is I think it was referred to as the Watcher in the pool outside, the gates of Moria. So you think it's an eerie reference.
Right.
And to me, that kind of drives home the point of, yes, you can look at it as just sort of very fantasy and, well, they don't really exist, so moving on. But they remind us of the fact that there are creatures in our world, we don't see them,
Right.
We will call them fallen angels, right, that are far darker, far more dangerous. So I do think just that eerie sense of like, ooh, even the goblins were a little creeped out. They didn't know really what Gollum was, but there was something dark and sinister down at this one. We don't really go there, goblins are nasty, creatures, and for them to be a bit wigged out by, I think that's a good thing for us, and I think it's part of dare I say, the beauty or the what, I hate to keep saying the genius of Tolkien's Middle Earth, but it does remind us, we're not alone, and we might, I think, in a very materialistic, very technocratic world, we might think of ourselves as being, well, what I see is what I get. This is all there is, but there's a whole lot that we don't see, both good and bad.
That's a good point. So kind of, in a time of empiricism and strict empiricism, trying to kind of be, you could kind of boil this chapter down, not to do so, but to me, just having reflected on your comments, awareness is just a huge theme in this chapter.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that's actually a perfect point, because it's not just the awareness of, like, for example, of the ring. Well, this could be helpful. Or the awareness that he does develop of that little sword, but the awareness of that around him.
Well said.
Yeah, absolutely. So he does meet one of these creatures that, have slunk in there from the outside, and he gets, to that edge of the water, and once again, a kind of a creepy, but I think a good creepy, like, it's a good thing for us to reflect upon, is that Bilbo, before he sees this creature that we know as Gollum, Gollum sees him before that, and he's been watching him and puzzled. He's not, obviously Bilbo's not a goblin, and I don't know if, what else Gollum's intrigued. His interest is piqued. He's already somewhat, honestly not well fed, but he's not immediately hungry at the moment. But then he gets, we find out Bilbo, I don't know if Bilbo ever really maybe he finds out that there's a little bit of an island. This is a little bit of a lake of sorts. Mm-hmm. There's a bit of a rocky outcropping, I guess, a little bit of an island where Gollum kind of lives, I guess. And he has a little boat, and he paddles very quietly. And what is this creature, as we know Bilbo? And all of a sudden, he makes his presence known by, I guess, talking to himself. Freaks Bilbo out.
That'd be pretty alarming.
Oh my heavens, I mean, you're in the dark and everything. So Bilbo has his sword drawn, and Gollum doesn't really like the looks of it, so Gollum suggests, well, perhaps we just, sit down here and talk a bit. I mean, that's not exactly what he said, but so they end up playing that which I don't know if in the if there's actually a historical precedent to that. Like, is it really the riddle game? Is that an ancient game? I don't know.
I think there is. What's the one story, the riddle of the Sphinx?
Oh yeah,
I forget. I don't know.
But yes. So Gollum suggested Bilbo, because he doesn't have anything else, like as a plan. So sure. So they start asking. Gollum asked the first, because Bilbo can't think of one.
Poor Bilbo.
Yeah, Bilbo's not really the best at
He's
this
terrible
game.
at this
Yeah,
game.
he's in the end he's downright terrible. So Bilbo, his technically speaking, by his own merit, his score is kind of 3 out of 5.
Right.
Whereas Gollum, for the strictly speaking, the riddles, he actually gets 4 out of 4.
And the last one not really.
Yeah,
even being attempt.
the last one's not really a riddle. The fact that Gollum accepts it, the challenge. So yes, Gollum is a 4 out of 5, and by as Tolkien would say, as by luck, Bilbo actually gets 5 out of 5. So the 3 he's able to answer pretty well. The one of the ones that he's completely, bamboozled by. Interestingly enough, at this point, Gollum is still in his little boat, and Gollum's getting impatient. Gollum wants to, well, let's move it on, and and he steps out of the boat, and I guess his foot catches sort of unaware a fish, and the fish jumps out and hits Bilbo's foot. And well, that's the answer to the riddle.
Right.
I mean, Bilbo just, oh, fish, well, that's the answer to the riddle. Well, talk about luck. Well, it happens the second time, and once again, Gollum's impatience is really kind of, in this case, his worst enemy, because his impatience pushes Bilbo to say, and he's thinking to himself, I need more time, and I think Tolkien actually said, he squeaks out, time.
Yeah.
That happens to be the answer to the riddle, and so you think, wow, squeak past that one again. And then it's Bilbo's turn to ask a riddle, and here's Gollum right next to him. I think he's actually kind of sort of poking him, because Gollum is getting a little more interested, like, I think it might be, a good meal, maybe, so it's freaking Bilbo out.
Crazy.
And Bilbo at this point, you can't think of anything, with this guy's right next to him, this creature, and so he just inadvertently, by luck, sticks his hand in his pocket. And remember, when he originally picked up the ring, he just almost like absentmindedly just stuck it in his pocket and just forgot about it. Well, he sticks his hand in his pocket, and he's like, what do I have in my pocket? Just not asking Gollum, but just asking the question to himself. But he asks it out loud, and Gollum then takes it as, well, that's a riddle, not per se, but he kind of persists. And Bilbo says, well, anyway, you can read this. Our audience has read the chapter, or we'll read the chapter and get the whole drift of it. And well, Gollum can't answer it. So on a technicality, Bilbo wins the game and demands the reward, which was going to be, okay,
Get me
out of here. So Gollum, we know the whole story, and Gollum just, understandably, when he recognizes, wait, my ring's gone, that freaks him out. Then he also kind of starts putting 2 together, thinking that's what he's got in his pocket, and he is just like the guided missile right on him, and Bilbo freaks out. And so this is where you think, oh, we got a lot to learn. So Bilbo turns to run, he stubs his toe on something, and he falls to the ground, and his sword's underneath him, and he's just a lame, or not a lame, sitting duck, so to speak. Gollum is on the pursuit, and at that point, Bilbo happens, I don't know if his hand's in his pocket still, but it specifically says the ring went onto his finger. Not that Bilbo put the ring on, but the ring put itself basically on Bilbo's, and Bilbo disappears.
And to be fair, at this point in the novel, Bilbo would be the type of person to have both hands in his pockets
Well,
while running from some sort of danger. You know?
Yes. So, and Gollum passes right past him because he can't see him. And then eventually Gollum, once Bilbo recognizes, wait a second, why did he recognize this? This ring makes me invisible. He follows Gollum very stealthily. Gollum gets to, I don't know what they call it. It's not the side entrance. I don't know what the goblin's name for this, but anyway.
There's a lot of this novel too, by the way, because that's how. I don't want to give any spoilers, but there's lots of like secondary ways of entering.
Oh yes. So Gollum knows it's the only way out, and he basically puts himself on like a hair trigger. It's like he's cocked back.
He's ready
just
to go.
Ready. Once he senses, hears him try to sneak past him, he's going to be on Bilbo, and Bilbo knows that, and he's thinking, what am I going to do? So Bilbo has made some attempts to get out, because when he's telling Gollum, hey, I won the game, you got to show me how to get out of here. But Bilbo's attempts on their own, by their own nature, are just utterly futile.
Yeah.
I mean, he ends up falling down, and he's on his sword. He can't, as Tolkien says, he can't even wave his little sword at all. It's got nothing. He's at the point like, okay, now I got my exit point, but I can't. How am I going to get around him? What am I going to do? So he comes to the conclusion, I got to kill him. So we'll come back to that, but. So we got this sort of whole thing going on with Bilbo's attempts are really not working out very well, okay? But before, because we're going to come back to, but how did he get out? Before we leave Gollum, it's probably good to say, because for whatever reason, I have this picture in my mind of, and this is one of the reasons why, once again, movies are good, and even good movies are only so good, because good movies are kind of giving you what the director is kind of picturing. So sometimes it's good just to be able to use your imagination. So I have this imagination, of this imagined kind of image of Bilbo there sitting on the shore of this little lake, and right next to him is Gollum. And you look at them, and they look, different in many ways, but in one sense, they're of the same stature. There's kind of the same, because I think we eventually find out that Gollum, he wasn't always like this.
No,
he's probably of a Hobbit nature, so you think, they kind of look, in some respects, kind of similar in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, they're very different. But this encounter with Gollum is, I would say, almost a little bit, maybe not at the moment, but maybe this is something for Bilbo to reflect upon. It's kind of almost like looking in the mirror.
Yes, it is. Because that would be very unusual in this world that Tolkien's created. The hobbits already seem kind of like different from everybody else in a way.
Yes.
By the virtue of their stature, and then to see something that's like all the enemies we've encountered thus far. Trolls, or something just like real, like, oh my gosh, that's obvious evil.
Right.
And then this thing, which this looks like you.
Right.
It's reflective, isn't it?
Right. And as Gandalf will tell, this Lord of the Rings, but he will tell Frodo, they knew sort of a lot of this. You can't imagine Bilbo playing the riddle game with maybe a goblin or a troll or it's just, they had some similarities, and Gandalf kind of drives the point home a little bit more, which I'm not going to get into the details of that, but Frodo really finds that almost repulsive, because no, Gollum is nothing, we're nothing alike. Well, they actually kind of are. Gollum has allowed the ring to take possession of him and poisoned him over, I think he's like in the mountain for like 500 years or something. I mean, a long time. You think, well, what's that got to do with Bilbo? Well, Bilbo isn't at that point by any stretch of the imagination, but Bilbo's on a path of being self-absorbed. I mean, he's very respectively, in a very respectable way, he is though self-absorbed with comfort, with the, if you will, the physical comforts of life, the comfort of knowing that, he has a good reputation, which, I mean, we're all, allowed to have a good reputation, but he's very, I think he allows himself to be motivated or moved by what other people think of him, which that's not a good thing. That's not a virtuous path to be on. But he's also sort of self-absorbed by the fact that you kind of get the impression that he's kind of the master of his life, and he's, which, okay, there's a little bit of truth to that, but there's that sense of, he's just going to call the shots the way he wants to do it, not in a nasty way, but just, he's in charge. And this is part of this whole mystery, or the whole journey, this whole saga, this epic of, Bilbo is going to be put into a lot of situations, this being one, not the first one, but one of the major ones where he's not in charge, and he doesn't even have a plan, and this luck.
He's hopeless, right?
Yeah, this luck is kind of helping him out. Well, as I said before, his plans are just by themselves really futile, but they're not useless, I would say, because his attempts are being guided by some other force. Now, Tolkien, in a way, I think, just so to kind of keep it clean of any, he doesn't want it to look like it's an analogy of like, oh, okay, well, this means this means that. So he doesn't want it to sort of it's eminently Catholic in the way which Middle-earth is imagined and the way things work. It is completely Catholic in that sense, without it having the trappings or the language of Catholicism. So we would call this divine providence. Tolkien, I think, in his way, is just referring to it as luck. He doesn't believe, as a Catholic, as a faithful Catholic, he would never ever believed in luck, but he's using it in a way that just, it doesn't, I don't say clutter up, he specifically wanted to remove any references to religion, to Catholicism.
Right.
And so when he's being guided, Bilbo's efforts, even though by themselves are really pretty pathetic.
Right.
But they're not useless because he's actually being guided in ways that
That's
he
really a good point.
was not planning.
That's a really good point. And also, I think that, as the audience approaches the end of this book, I think actually the last page, there's a very strong, that's not, what your observation that you just made is not something that's like, well, maybe Tolkien, he could have meant divine providence when he said, look, we're going to go. There's a very, very strong case to be made that Tolkien did not intend for that. If anything, as a children's story, something that might have, if you had young Christopher Tolkien, as a, what do I tell him, luck, and then he understands it at the end or something like that.
Right. And I think it is the way in which Tolkien is helping us journey through Middle-earth and allowing us there's lots of places where you can take it at face value and it means something. Mm-hmm. But then there are enough sort of details or enough nudges that Tolkien gives you in the narrative. You think, wait a second, I don't think that's exactly what I thought it meant initially. There's a deeper sense. So this would be one of those areas where, because when you get to that point, I don't know if you have that kind of pulled up, if you will, when you get to the point where Bilbo is sort of at his wit's end. What do I do? Okay, I've got certainly, the ring finding the ring, being a magic ring that makes someone invisible, and the ring actually coming onto his finger, being put, Bilbo didn't put the ring on his finger, the ring put itself on his finger. Well, there's this force that is guiding this, in a way that Bilbo had not planned or anticipated. But now he's at this point where he says, okay, I'm really stuck. And
Yeah,
he
there's
thinks,
that creepy creature right there. I gotta do something.
I gotta kill him. And he says, well, it's not a fair fight. I realized he didn't really say he was gonna kill me. He isn't armed, I am. I've got a sword. And he pauses, which I think is exceptionally important, that he doesn't just say, well, I'm gonna kill him. Okay, let's go. You know, he pauses, and it reminds me a little bit, and then I'll let you read that, because I think it's a very, very powerful passage, which I think it really drives home the point of, like, Tolkien is not just talking about luck here, but it reminds me of that pause. That reminds me a little bit of St. Joseph, as he's like, okay, I think this is what I should probably do, to send, you know, Mary away quietly. It's the only time we see St. Joseph actually pausing, because he's a man of action. When he knows what God wants him to do, he just does it. Just does it. What wakes up every time, he's just absolute man of action, except for this one time, because he's not sure if it's God's will. I'm not saying that that's what Bilbo or Tolkien is intending, but you think Bilbo he's not sure. It doesn't seem right to him for him to kill Gollum. And then he is moved, and I think you have that passage there.
Here we go. It says, I'm going to start with, he must stab the foul thing. He must stab the foul thing, put its eyes out, kill it. It meant to kill him. No, not a fair fight. He was invisible now. Gollum had no sword. Gollum had not actually threatened to kill him, or tried to yet.
Which I think is amazing, because, right, that's like giving Gollum, what would you say?
It's different than an orc, you know. There's
right.
It indicates that Gollum actually has some sort of capacity for good. Would you say?
Yes, which I don't want to divert this off, but
no,
it gives Gollum this benefit of the doubt, because you think, wait, narrow. Like, did he? I think he intended to kill him, but he's giving Bilbo's giving Gollum almost this incredible benefit of the doubt. It reminds me, I don't want to divert us off, back to Lord of the Rings, or into the Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf never writes Gollum off totally, in the sense that there's always this hope that he might change. It's not probable,
wow, that's a good
but there's
point.
that possibility. And you're absolutely right. You never see this with trolls, or goblins in this case, or orcs in Lord of the Rings, you know, or any of these foul creatures. This smog that we're gonna, you know, encounter. Yes, there's never, but with Gollum there is.
You're right, it's maybe the only character.
It is. I think it is the only character. So,
and it goes on. It says, this actually sounds a lot like Bilbo, as to your point of being reflected. It says he was miserable. He was alone and lost. It's like, yeah, a sudden.
And Gollum, and that's the reference to Gollum is, and so Bilbo is thinking,
yeah,
well, gosh, that would be horrible, because Bilbo himself is alone and lost.
Exactly.
Like, well, gosh, this, you know. So there's that. Yes, absolutely.
This is where you wanted to get to. I think a sudden understanding, a pity mixed with horror, welled up in Bilbo's heart. A glimpse of endless, unmarked days without light or hope of betterment. Hard stone, cold fish, sneaking, whispering. All these thoughts passed in the flash of a second. He trembled, and then quite suddenly, in another flash, as if lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leapt.
I think, to me, this is what, honestly, it's a great kid's story.
Yeah.
But for any adult that's got sort of, how do I say this? Has some self-reflective thought process in their brain, would say, oh, wait a second, something else is happening here. This is not just, you know, because it's interesting, he says, in a flash of a second, or just in a flash, he has this feeling of pity for Gollum. And then in another flash, it's not as if he's thinking, oh gosh, what am I going to do?
Yeah,
oh wait, you know, I guess I really should have some pity for this poor thing, you know.
Yeah.
It's just, we would call it's a moment of grace.
It is a moment of grace, and it's funny because it's like in the same paragraph. Would it be natural for someone to say, he must stab the foul thing and put its eyes out, and then go,
well,
no,
you know
gosh,
what?
I
Now,
don't
on
know.
further reflection, I think I'm going to alter that original decision. It's completely contradictory.
Yes, it is.
But it's not contradictory to the nature of Bilbo, because Bilbo actually is a good little guy.
Yes, he is a good little guy. You're right.
And he can be moved by grace much more easily. Gollum could be, but it's going to be a heck of a lot harder. That's one of the reasons I think that Gandalf says, Gandalf never gives up on him, but he recognizes it is very improbable that it's going to happen because there's such a hardness. But Bilbo has a good heart. And even though he's thinking, I'm going to stab the vile thing, but he pauses and he doesn't just say, all right, here we go.
Right.
He pauses and thinks, is that the right thing? That's why it kind of reminds me of St. Joseph, and not, like I said, trying to compare the two exactly, but and there's that moment of grace where he feels there's this movement in his heart and mind where he thinks, gosh, it'd be terrible. And it's not Bilbo. It's working on the goodness of Bilbo. It's working with the efforts that he has made thus far.
Yeah.
In and of themselves at this point not working, but it's working. And there's a phrase in theology: grace builds upon nature. Grace, it takes the nature and elevates it. And to me, this is, once again, if as an adult reading this, certainly as a Catholic adult, you can't but notice something other than Bilbo is moving here.
That's a fabulous point, and it made me think of Thorin too, because Thorin, he's not, his grace receptor, his divine providence receptor is not as in tune.
No, and he is much more. Thorin's a harder ship to sort of steer on that. We won't say what happens. Something very beautiful at the very end.
True.
But yeah, so we'll get to that eventually. And then, as if that weren't enough, I don't know if you could find that passage again, because the leap, you think, wait, what? Let me do the math on that. If Bilbo's,
I got it right here.
Bilbo's like, how tall do we say Bilbo?
3 foot
three. Let's get 3.5. Let's make it generous. 3.5. You think, okay, so this leap.
Yeah, it's like he suddenly becomes an Olympic athlete here.
Yeah.
No great leap for a man, but a leap in the dark. Straight over Gollum's head he jumps 7 feet 7 feet forward, and 3 in the air.
Yeah, you think just the math alone, you think, okay, Bilbo, was he training for the Olympic, was he the high jump? Was
he on the 96 Chicago Bulls team or something?
He must have been. Oh no, he wasn't. Okay, well how is that?
Right.
If you would mathematically do the numbers on, like us, someone who's 6 feet tall, you think, will that be like at least 12 feet,
Yeah.
probably 12 foot plus forward, and 5 feet up? Well,
Crazy.
okay, that's crazy. And just in case you're like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure about that, there's one last detail that he puts in there.
With this. It says, indeed, had he known it, he only just missed cracking his skull on the low arch of the passage.
Okay, so
It's pitch black in here, right?
pretty sure this wasn't like, man, that was incredible luck. It's no longer luck at this point. You could say, well, missing cracking your skull, because that would have been the end. Gollum would have been, because he snatches at him. He barely missed Bilbo. If Bilbo would have been deflected or just hit something,
He would have been.
Gollum would have been on him,
man.
dead. He would absolutely. So, not only is there a physical, that's not, but there's that guidance, and most importantly, it's the guidance of Bilbo's heart to pity.
Yeah.
You know, so there's just a lot of beautiful stuff here. So it once again, I think it really bears that reflection. I would say, because just to kind of close us out here,
Gosh.
there's, I mean,
What a
we
neat
spent,
chapter.
how many times,
We've read this a lot, man.
my
This
gosh,
is-
how many days or weeks did we spend this with the class? We're like, yeah, I know, it's chapter 5 again.
Well,
Still.
for the audience viewing at home, Father is a man of great patience, and also a very good at Socratic teaching. So he'll say, I remember, I think it was last year in 2021,
Yes.
asking the class, so luck is Bilbo, and they're like, yes, he is very lucky.
This, that, this, the 15th point. Is this luck? Well, maybe not.
And I'm not making fun of our students. I'm just
No,
saying,
it's-
what would have been on par with watching what you've watched up to this point, and then the entire class goes, well, yeah, he's lucky.
Yeah, I think he was lucky, One of our students said, I think he just froze. I think the only reason he didn't kill him is because, and it was a good insight, not correct, but it was a good insight, or a good possible insight, I should say, was he said, I just think he froze on the trigger, so to speak. That's what happens to people, young soldiers in war, and that happens all the time, and that's just that's why he didn't kill him. I'm like, no, that's not
Never
at
can.
all what that. So it took us a while to kind of flesh
man.
out. But just to
Oh,
kind of,
yes, sir.
as we reflect and kind of drive the points home to ourselves. So just
Sure.
a couple sort of points of reflection or questions to kind of reflect upon. So a lot can pass by. Well, you know what, I'm just going to read instead of
Sure.
extemporaneously, kind of just because then we might never get through this. So much can pass by in life if we are not sufficiently self-reflective. How well do we do with our nightly examination of conscience? St. Ignatius of Loyola, he had a daily exam, and that was exceptionally important. In fact, for his Jesuits, both in formation and as their priests moved forward, twice a day doing the daily exam for 15 minutes apiece. I'm not saying that you have to do it that way, but very, very important. So, number 2, because we remember Bilbo is almost this image of Bilbo sitting next to Gollum and almost looking in the mirror. And Bilbo really, I don't think, can quite see exactly what some of his faults are in that sense. But so what is a predominant vice that perhaps I am not that well aware of in my life? Maybe God's going to sort of put the mirror in front of me a little bit and might be a little uncomfortable. How am I trying to overcome it? And obviously we're going to see that more with more self-reflective examination of conscience, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
And then my last point, or my last question of self-reflection is, in what ways in my life do I find myself relying more on my own efforts and abilities rather than turning to God? Because we see Bilbo trying to escape, you're like, buddy, it's not really working. It's good. You get points for effort, but terrible, you're laying on your sword. I don't think you're good. So when we rely upon ourselves, and by golly, we can get pretty frustrated and it can get pretty dark. But in what ways could my life be more fruitful or bear more fruit if I humbly entrusted these things to God? And I would just really encourage people to reread that little section that you just read and really think about it. It's a very powerful, and that is a part of what Tolkien rewrote in there. And powerful, beautiful thoughts to reflect upon. So.
Definitely. So next episode, chapter 6 and 7.
Yes, 6 and 7.
Because we've actually recorded that
Yes,
one already.
we had some technical problems.
Yes,
with
we
our
did. It's all
number
my
five,
fault.
So.
It really is, actually.
No, it's all good.
But I had more fun. I actually had more fun talking about it this time than I did last time.
God's providence. So
Yes, sir.
We got lucky. On that note, may God bless all of you, and we'll see you in the next installment.